been tracking conservatives on at different news outlets as they've aligned themselves with the president on hydroxychloroquine and on other issues. What does your reporting reveal on that front?
It's interesting because if you had experienced the story of the president's remarks yesterday in the briefing through conservative media, you either would not have known that he said it, or you would have received a very sanitized version of those remarks. Earlier today on Fox News, I happened to be listening to the way they were covering this, and the editing of what the president said would have left you with the impression that he was taken out of context, that indeed he could have been talking about a life-saving experimental measure to use light to kill the virus. So I really think when all is said and done, the political divides in this country are being imposed on the real scientific conversations, medical issues that have to do with this virus in a way that is going to reflect very poorly on this country's political discourse. You essentially have the culture wars in America colliding with this global health crisis. And that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the people who are sick. And it's not a good thing for people who are trying to prevent themselves from getting sick. I mean, the idea of a medication, a debate over medication entering a political context is really kind of uncharted territory for us.
And it's been an uncharted territory, Tolu, since the early 1960s. You think back to President Kennedy in 1962, making sure through the amendment to the Food and Drug Safety Act that drugs would be approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that they're both safe and efficacious. When you report on this culture inside of the administration, and you see Dr. Bright, his challenges with the president and the president's advisors, you also saw FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn at the White House today standing next to the president, making a few remarks. What are you hearing from your sources about whether health experts, whether it's Commissioner Hahn or it's Dr. Birx, feel pressure to go along with the president's beliefs over science?
Well, they do. I mean, President Trump said it himself that he's not a doctor, but he pointed to his brain and he basically said that he has the information that he needs in order to direct the federal health response to this pandemic. It's very clear that the president wants to play a central role, overruling his doctors, talking up drugs that have not been vetted, talking about treatments that have not been vetted that are on their face sort of laughable when it comes to things like using light inside people's bodies or using disinfectants inside people's bodies to try to get rid of a virus that very many experts, medical experts, scientific experts around the world are trying to figure out ways to get rid of this virus. And the idea that the president, who has no medical expertise, would just sort of come up with something on the top of his head and it would work, it may convince his supporters, but it does not actually carry much weight in the scientific community, and it does not actually work when it comes to actually trying to get rid of this virus. So all of these experts are trying to tiptoe around the president. They're trying to explain away his comments. They're trying to figure out ways to work with him, work with his very unique personality, but it has been difficult. We have seen people like Dr. Bright getting pushed out of the administration. We've seen people like Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci trying to figure out ways to convince the president to stay on his good side, not badmouth him too much so that they would listen to him when they bring various recommendations. But it has been difficult. The president has put a lot of pressure on his medical experts, and that's why we've seen such a disjointed response from the White House and from the administration.
Nancy, to that point, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo of California announced today that she's going to try to call Dr. Bright to come testify about his experience. He wants to be a whistleblower. Will House Democrats pursue investigations on all of these issues?
Yes, I asked Pelosi about that in her press conference, and she said absolutely. And here's where the real-world situation creates some logistical challenges. If we were living in normal times, you can be sure that the House would have already scheduled a hearing featuring Dr. Bright. They would want to haul him before Congress and before Anna Eshoo's committee as quickly as possible to hear what he has to say. But at this point, we're in this limbo where we believe that the House will come back to Washington on May 4th. But that is pending the decisions by not just officials here in the District of Columbia, but also the Capitol physician and the Sergeant at Arms. So this is this is a decision that's being made in concert. If all of those individuals decide it's not safe for lawmakers to come back to Washington yet, even though many of them want to, then that date will get pushed off again, and some of the urgency here will be lost. As you know, Robert, there was a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks about perhaps enabling House members to hold hearings remotely. The technology exists to allow them to do that, but there's been a lot of debate over whether that's a good idea, whether they could do it securely and safely, and it's been tied to the issue of remote voting, which is also very controversial, and so that's kind of gotten punted for now, which means it could be weeks before Dr. Bright comes and speaks to Congress.
But do you think he could come to testify this summer or sometime?
It sounds like he's very interested in telling his story, and certainly House Democrats are very eager to hear it. So I think that, as long as the House is back here in Washington in session, I think it appears that both sides are eager to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Shannon, one final question on this particular issue. Hydroxychloroquine, the FDA issued a statement, a warning about it. You have the president touting a lab study about sunlight. It has not been peer-reviewed. I know you said the political advisors are saying, hey, Mr. President, maybe enough with the news conferences, but is he going to pull back at all from making statements that are not approved or supported by the FDA about drugs and about treatments?
Well, I will say it's been about 2 weeks since he talked about hydroxychloroquine publicly at one of these briefings. He raised it at a briefing about 2 weeks ago. He had some coronavirus survivors who came into the cabinet room, and a couple of them said that they had taken it, but that was pretty much it. And since then, there has been a chip of stories raising, and studies, I mean, not stories, but actual medical studies raising questions about this. The FDA put out a statement cautioning people not to use this outside the medical setting. The FDA commissioner was at the briefing tonight. He talked about a test that had been approved, but made no mention of this new warning from the FDA about hydroxychloroquine. It has not been talked about on Fox News very much. There's been some analysis that shows that conversation dropping off. So I think on this front, the White House is really trying to distance themselves from that. But of course, as we saw in the briefing with the light and the disinfectant, I think the president sometimes just can't help himself from wanting to try and go down the path of a miracle cure. He also talked about this week about a vaccine coming very soon, which it is not. But again, trying to get into Dr. Trump mindset, and we continue to see that.